Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Bold Moves podcast. I am your host, Angela Merzib. I am a brand strategist, and I help entrepreneurs build a bold brand that connects and converts. And I'm very happy to have Mike Skrypnek on the show today. Mike is an executive leadership expert and strategist helping entrepreneurs and industry leaders with a gift for creating risk-free, secure space for men in corporate, community, and family leadership roles to openly share their challenges and identify ways to overcome their limitations. Mike is an international bestseller of 9 books, woohoo! A keynote speaker, that's a lot of books, men's mental health advocate, and corporate wellness trainer. He is a sought after business strategist who has shared his insights and wisdom with thousands of passionate, purpose-driven entrepreneurs, business leaders, and executives. To transform lives with tangible actions, Mike focuses his energy on coaching and mentorship, commercial scale peer supporter training, and programming, as well as psychological first aid training. Welcome, Mike.
Hey, thank you, Angela. Glad to be here. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too. We always have great conversations. I'm sure this one will not be any different.
Me too. I agree. It's never a dull moment, but that's my wife's statement about me in general. Never a dull moment.
Exactly. Well, we only have about 45 minutes, so we'll try and stay on topic.
Awesome.
But let's dive in here. So I know you've built a career helping men in leadership step into some really vulnerable conversations in their lives. But I want to start at the beginning. So what were you doing before this time in your life?
Well, at 2 years old, no, I'm just kidding. I had, if you were looking at my professional career after university, mid 90s, I ended up in the finance industry. And for 22 years, I was heavily invested in the investment world as a wealth manager. The last decades, was invested in helping wealthy families redirect their capital to philanthropic pursuits. And, with that came a lot of complexity and training and big picture thinking along with the investments and strategies and tactics. And through that process, though, I was doing something that most people weren't. Most advisors in the industry, viewed helping nonprofits as a pastime and certainly a way to not make any money in the industry. Mm-hmm. And so I had to go seek coaches, and I invested heavily in coaches for a decade straight, probably $250,000 over the years. And all my coaches basically were in the US, and my, north-south travel, as Canadian, it was always, not at par. There was always an additional investment in there. And it was the magic of those where me build a business that was highly unique. And I fell in love with what they did for me and how they did it. And over the, kind of overlapping the end of my career in wealth management, I stepped into coaching and mentoring and working with executives. I knew a lot about business, and kind of that was the, I was all business. You've experienced some of that work almost a decade ago, my gosh. And it was business only. Like I am the business guy. Don't worry about your personal stuff elsewhere. We'll have a good relationship, but that's it. Like we're going after the business. And that was working. It seemed to work well for me up until, and I was growing this business of coaching, this business of supporting and guiding executives. And then it was rather old school, was speaking workshops, direct face-to-face, mostly face-to-face, and a model that was a little bit archaic in terms of wasn't really leaning on it. And there I was, COVID hits, and boom, the entire coaching industry gets, commoditized immediately. No one knows who's a guru, who's great, and who's, just a hack. And then, and everybody's looking for life coaching. And I'm like, I'm not that guy. And within 18 months, my business went to zero. And that was kind of the beginning of the next phase of my life.
So when COVID hit, you said coaching got commoditized. Is that because everyone could just pop in online and start a business? Is that what?
Yeah, what you saw was in the first 90 days, the biggest players who were really good, like the Tony Robbins of the world and all these people who had massive names and hundreds of thousands of people on their list, release something for $30, right? Instead of their typical, like thousands of dollars. And they would release it to 100,000 people. They made their few $1 million and they disappeared for months. And it was a good decision. Like they made a great business decision, but I was behind the 8 ball. I hadn't built that business to that level at that time. So I didn't have the list. So the marketing I did hit far less people and wasn't as viable, right? And then it was just start and stop of what's the new thing, what's the different thing, how do you differentiate yourself? And so when the best of the best were giving it away, or at least the perception of the market was that, why would I pay someone else a premium for that? And so busting through that just was a trial and error. And eventually the attrition hits your clients because they don't know where their business is going. No matter how well you're working with them, they're just like, I don't have any clarity. I got to stop. And it was like a battle of attrition. And for me, it was a battle of attrition and a spiral into isolation, all kinds of grappling with, being useless, worthless, completely unable to pay my bills, unable to help my household. So that spiral just like drove me into a personal existential crisis.
Yeah, I get it. I had a business partner during that time, and she had to leave the business because, like you say, if the world shuts down, well, your clients don't know what's coming, and so they shut everything down, and they're not hiring you for stuff, and so your business, tends to tank as well. So that's kind of what happened. And like, who can pivot that fast? Like Tony Robbins, sure, he's got a huge team, he's got a list, like you say, but solopreneurs and stuff like that, it was really hard to pivot. So
it's the people with the lists.
Yeah.
That was the value. And, that's what they would tell you. And in behind closed doors or in private, they'd say, there's nothing easy about building a list. Yeah. And once you built a list, it was valuable. It was greater than gold. And back in the day prior to technology overtaking, it was a direct mailing list.
Yeah.
But the math was very clear on that stuff. And percentages and return rates and open rates and all these things were very clear and predictable. The internet, digital world, social media, and the multitude of impacts and forces coming into people's lives and inboxes suddenly changed all that math, and metrics weren't no longer reliable. And so, I was just like, well, okay, you got to differentiate yourself and you change your model. And you're like, I don't have a list. How do I have a list that's robust? I can't build one. How do you do that? And for me, I was never really at that point, because of the wealth management. Interestingly, the wealth management industry for the prior decades was anti-media, social media, because it was a compliance risk in their eyes. And so in order to post, you actually had to go through a compliance web to get it all done. And so by the time you got the approval, it's 3 days later. It's like not relevant. So you just don't do it. And so I never got good at that. And so that's a skill that I'm much better at it now. But, but that's just a thing. And then, the evolution of my business ended up, embracing a lot more of the life coaching post event, if you will. And I was like garlic and, my wife, because you're a life coach, you help people at their most personal thing. Like, you might help their business, but because of that, you help their lives. And I'm like, yeah, but I know life coaches, and they sit around kumbaya-ing and hoping it just comes to them. And I'm like, that isn't a business. That doesn't help business. Right. And then, I realized through my own life journey that if you're fundamentally not right in some way, if there's something that you haven't dealt with, it will deal with you. And it's the recipe for the frustration of entrepreneurs that feel limited, that they're never really reaching their potential, or it's the manager of 1,000 people who go, how come every time this happens, I'm an asshole? Like, how come I'm the asshole, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or how come my marriage has never worked? Like all these people, these things, that an upward trajectory of really great people. And that's what my experience revealed to me. And it was hardwired, it was subconscious. And until I dealt with it, it would deal with me. And then when the pressures come, that's when the wheels fall off.
Yeah, and the wheels tend to fall off too. I don't know if this is common for everybody, but we tend to tie our worth into how our business is doing, how much money we're making, what we're actually accomplishing in our business. So we tend to tie all of our self-worth into that. Is that sounds like that's some of what happened to you when?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's phases. I'm aged. I'm like a good wine now. I'm like in my mid 50s, looking back, and there was a period of time where you're in a real accumulation phase, and then you're accumulating similarly to those around you, and that's what we did. We got the big house, the big nice car, we did all that stuff, and we had the furniture. But then when we moved and downsized, suddenly there was no value to the furniture. No one paid you it was 100 times less than what you paid. And like it just didn't seem to matter anymore. And so that's one aspect of it. But the other is this really, you mentioned that I do a lot of work with men, and I do a lot of work in a male orientation. I would say that a lot of the work and the services we do as a business are universal. Mental health and wellness is a universal challenge or opportunity. But I do understand, because I dug in. I want to know as a man, what the heck just happened to me? Are other men like me? How did other men navigate this, and what does it look like? And so, in that, digging into some things of worth. My book is Unlimited Worth, right? My most recent one. And the idea was I felt limited and worthless, and therefore when I broke through, it was unlimited, and there was opportunities for as much worth as I always deserved. And men tie their value in life. So worth and value have very different meanings, right?
Okay.
We are born worthy. We're all worthy of being on this planet. Our value, though, isn't always, it's situational, right? Like I'm not that valuable I don't know, I can't build a bridge. So don't put me on a bridge with a welding tool. I'm not going to do it very well. And it'll take me 20 times longer than a guy who's really good. But I'm really valuable in conversations like this, or conversations in business. So when you understand where you're most valuable, you feel like you're in the right place. And so not to get that confused. And men have this sense of their worth being connected, and we can't avoid it because it is genetic. It's DNA driven, to think that, we're in modern society. Well, we're wired by, hundreds of thousands of years, if not billions of years of DNA wiring. And that means that men are genetically kind of predisposed to provide, protect, and procreate. I mean, we're all here to kind of pass it on into the next generation, but men provide and protect. And that piece, when it becomes risked and the effort becomes futile, a male's value of worth, a male's value no longer is relevant in his family or in his community or in his business. At least that's a perception. And you begin to rise to the worth that you have on this planet, which then for me led to me considering that then I had no worth being here. And that was the next step. Is I had decided that over a 10-day period, every day I would just like, today's the day I think it's going to be over. I'm going to do this today. And, when you get to that point, it's astounding how rational it seems. But in looking back in my own work to investigate it, to write my book and to help other people over the last few years, that's it. We can't avoid some of this. Like some of this is just, we're all like this. We have these, there's a nurturing and preserving kind of nature of women and genetically. Like it's not that a spectrum doesn't exist, but at our core, we have these very core things that we are tied to, whether we like it or not. And when it becomes put at risk, we feel that maybe we don't have a place any longer. And in modern society, the tools that we've used, that we've adapted in life, good and bad experiences formulate how we behave. Sometimes they're just not very coherent or consistent with our environment. Like if you learn to fight when you're cornered, or whatever happened to you as a kid, and fight was your option, well, that doesn't work in an office.
Yeah, no, not for long.
God, who's gonna go? It's like you can't do that.
Yeah.
And it's not healthy to run when you're in a conversation, and you're in a business situation and you're having a conversation and it feels heated and you friggin' take off. Like that's not helpful either. But in the forest, when we're trying to prevent ourselves from being eaten by a bear or attacked by a snake, great tools, right?
Right.
So we have to understand that there's some pieces of our puzzle that remain hardwired, but we can actually dig in and begin to unwire and rewire better behaviors.
Yeah, if we look at it, with intention, and sometimes we don't even know that that's what we're doing until somebody else points it out to us.
99% of the time, like it was one of the biggest revelations. I go through therapy, 10 days straight, EMDR, intense therapy to unwire what had happened to me as a kid, right? So I had this abuse story. It happened 11, and lo and behold, it was happening with me for the next 40 years.
Yeah.
I had no idea how it was affecting me. I had no idea that this was operating. I had no mental health issues throughout my life. And, and then I get this reveal when we dig in and go, this is what is going on. This is how it's wired. Look at these patterns. Like all of a sudden it became so clear. And you're like, I just see the last 40 years. If only someone said something, but no one around us really is aware. Like no one knows, well, there's something, but I don't know what it is, right? There's something about that person, I really like them, and why does this keep happening? But I can't put my finger on it, so I'm just going to leave it. And so no one in our network tend to understand. Even my wife, my best friend, was the only person who knew. She's like, didn't have the tools or experience to know what was going on. So we don't see it, and that's by design. It's subconscious, right? It's supposed to not be seen. And then when I looked at it, I'm like, oh my gosh, I was doing that like for years and years. I would do the same thing, and it was just stress, and it created a life of trial and retry and loss, financial loss, and business transition. So, leaders in my investigation don't get to a point of leadership in community and corporate and family, wherever it is, without having really great skills, right? They have great skills, and they have this grit and this determination and a charismatic air about them that helps bring other people along. The challenge, of course, is 3/4 of everyone has something. We've got something wired in. Sometimes it's innocuous. Like sometimes it is really good. Like when this happens, do this, right? But sometimes it affects how we manage people, work with people, or take risks. And, if we are ready to risk the entire fortune of 10,000 people in $1 billion company on a press of a button or a bad deal because we don't read people well, we're not very helpful, right? And we might be at the pinnacle of our career and still have that flaw or that thing, right? And so I help people understand that it can be uncovered, it can be removed and rewired so that we don't have that again.
Yeah. So I know you were hesitant to get into or call yourself a life coach, but I know your wife mentioned that to you and you're like, no, that's not me. But what was that final spark that made you realize this was the work you needed to do to sort of intersect between life coaching and business coaching? What was that like?
I think that there was a fear. Well, I know that for a fact. Okay. So part of my relationship was I had my patterns where I had a bad relationship. I selected, somehow I pushed good men away and selected guys with flaws. And therefore I was working with people who were really dynamic, but they had like flaws. And so this pattern of behavior in terms of insulating yourself because of all the times I'd been like blindsided. And, I was right in there. It's not like I wasn't kind of aware, but all of a sudden it's like, that was the magnification moment. And now it's like hit the fan. And now you're like, so you build this insulation of like, well, I'm not going to go there personally, because if I go there, there's risk on one side. And then the other risk is I always felt like a scarcity mentality. and I was afraid to lose the business. So I was afraid to ask really personal, hard questions. I seemed to do it, but when I look back, it really didn't get there. And the other thing, I never really gave it. So I was good at maybe getting information out of people, and they felt like they were heard. But and they were, like, I wasn't pretending to do that. But what I wasn't doing was giving my part,
Right.
at the real level, because I was just afraid. If they find out my secret, I'm a pariah. I'm going to lose everything. Like, I'm going to lose the client. And so what I realized is, when you once you put this out into a book, once you tell your story, and once you've, come clean, if you will, about the secret. So I was sexually abused at 11, and that was the thing that set in some wiring that put me into this cycle of patterns. And then here I am having a crisis where I'm thinking about killing myself, like all these admissions in public, starting with family and therapists and then going outwards. When you finally undress like that in front of everybody, and you realize that risk you'd perceived for all those years of keeping that secret, keeping it from everybody, not dealing with it yourself, didn't live up to the hype. Like, it only got better. Things only got better. And you're like, wow, that's really powerful. I didn't realize. If only I had known again, And so I try to help people go, yeah, if only you knew that the thing that you perceive as the most risky is probably the least risky and the most enabling thing that will help you in your life. And so it's okay. So I lead with harder questions. It's not like you get grilled the moment you see me, but eventually, you kind of get there. Like, you're like, my radar is now pretty good for stuff, because I was afraid probably to go there with people because I didn't want to uncover their stuff. Because then it was like that whole, what is the phrase, can of worms? You worry about a can of worms. But I'm just like, you got to go there. If you don't, at some point, sometime, most of us it'll rear its head and it'll affect us in a big way. And if it affects us, guys in particular, it's going to hurt other people, right? It comes out as harm in some way. We may ruin a business. We may hurt ourselves. We may hurt other people. And that is a disproportionate effect on the planet that can't be tolerated. And so that's how I view it, is I have an obligation to open this conversation up early and often with as many people as possible.
Yeah. Plus, when you're vulnerable like that, it helps open the door for other people because they see you tearing your walls down, and it's easier for them to do so versus just, like you say, like grilling them, right? It's like, whoa, why are you hold up here, right? So,
and there's some humor in it, this is not a big dark cloud issue. This really, like, bad stuff happens universally. I think at some point in someone's life, you live long enough, bad stuff really does happen to us all.
Yeah.
And so why are we so, negative about it? Why does it feel like a dark cloud issue? And it's usually a dark cloud issue for the same reason it was for me. And that is because I'd rather ignore it. I pretend like it never existed. And if I could keep it a secret, I would, but I couldn't any longer. And, that idea of entering into the conversation, of uncovering those things, it's actually a process of assistance, of support. I am a bit torn. Like, the premise of vulnerability is extremely powerful. Brene Brown speaks of it all the time. And I totally am aligned with that. There's a point at which vulnerability creates vulnerability, though. When you're not, because if you're vulnerable and not well, you continue to be victimized by your own inability to heal, or or to access that which you need to heal, or supports, or the networks, or whatever. So, if you're coming into a situation thinking that you lead with vulnerability and yet you're not on stable ground, it's not going to help. It's not going to help the other person, and it's not going to help you. So building stability across key elements of your life helps to allow you to enter into that comfortably and confidently.
Yeah. And with vulnerability, I don't know if it's true with men still, but it's often seen as a weakness. So how do you get around the men you work with who are in leadership that don't easily open up? How do you get them to be vulnerable, and if they see it as a weakness, a threat to their masculinity?
The weakness is perceived because there's a sense that those who claim vulnerability, wallow in vulnerability, and they don't get on with things. And you know what? There's some reality to that. That exists. One of the other thing is the language of psychology or therapy, or just the premise of, Brene Brown. She's the big vulnerability person. Well, she is, and that's a big issue. Not a negative one, but men have a different way of understanding what that means to them, and the common language, the common tools that are used, often the language doesn't mesh very well with what men are comfortable with. So if you're, for example, you're talking about creating a safe space to become vulnerable. Well, Angela, you and I can talk, and I know that there's some other issues that are topical as of late. There's a good reason, and women in my life can't say that on a daily basis. Occasionally they don't feel safe, right? They have these moments where it's like, it's not a safe environment. I've never had to check the backseat of my car. I rarely have ever carried my keys in a certain way, right? And I've never worried about the lights in the parking lot. Men generally, if you ask any man, you say, did you feel unsafe anytime in the last month? And they go, no, never, right? Because that word doesn't resonate.
Right.
And the reason is because we are wired to perceive risk and threats. And threats and risk are different than safety, although it all boils down to being personally safe. But if we receive a risk in the room, like we're constantly looking, who's going to take our stuff? Who's going to prevent us from excelling? Who's going to make us look bad? Like that's a male who's going to, and even a more primitive way, who's going to fight us? Who's going to threaten our lives? Who's going to take our kids? Like all that stuff. And so we perceive risk. If you give men in a private or group setting this removal of risk, if you take it away, if you say nothing goes outside of this room, and you can share what you need to share, now there's the psychological safety they need. So it's about risk. There's no risk that you'll lose your position in your job. You won't lose anything. You won't lose status. You'll lose nothing. You're just going to share. Men will not shut up. So that's what a little secret behind closed doors are. 15 garbage men, mechanics, executives in a room. You open up a risk-free environment for them to talk openly and give them that permission. They talk openly and they talk vulnerably, and they share things that most people will never have heard from them. And, that's a magical thing. But the setting matters, the language matters, and the understanding of what that means, what the gravity of that conversation means is really key.
Yeah, I like how you seem to be very good at breaking things down. Like you talked about the difference between worth and value, and those are different things. I hadn't thought about that before. And then now you're talking about threats and risk versus safety, how men think about this. Were those kind of the pieces of the puzzle that you thought the coaching industry were missing, and this is why you took this new approach? Or what do you feel like you're doing differently in this industry, and what was it missing that you saw as the missing puzzle piece that you're
when I look in the male space in particular, I investigated. It was investigation. It was a constant curiosity, right? So I'm like, I know why I didn't say anything in the first decade, because I was a teenager. Your brain wires things in and says, you're never going to deal with that. But as an adult, it was on my head and it was on my mind constantly. The Me Too movement that started right around 2004, publicly, every single day that's out there, and I'm going, me too. And I'm keeping that secret for another 20 years almost. And so the investigation was, why didn't I talk? Why didn't I seek help? Why didn't I do that? And then why is it that the average duration of a man who is abused sexually or physically in a shameful way takes 24 years to reveal that truth? Okay, so it might even be longer, but there's probably suicides in there. And so you go, okay, well then why does it take 2.5 decades to talk about this? And my investigation became the curiosity of that became the investigation point. And so I began to, investigate, interview, and talk to men and dig into, why this is the case. And then the language started to come out, and I started to go, well, why are men talking the same way? Why are 70+% of the psychology profession women? Why are the graduates in school women? What's going on with men and boys, and how are we maturing? And what responsibility do we have as leaders to do this right? Because it's just going to keep going generation after generation if we don't fix something. So attend to the men in leadership, create cultures that bring in an opportunity for young men to become good and whole, because they want a better environment than what we had. And if we give them that opportunity, they can thrive.
Yeah. So do you work specifically with abuse survivors, or?
No, I don't. I'd say maybe I have a certain, my situation, it was really a single incident.
Yeah.
But boy, did it ever leave a mark, or maybe 2 incidents. I can't even recall if there were 2. I guarantee there was 1, but I don't know if there were 2. They just, your brain works differently when you're a child.
Yeah.
I don't see where there's more value or less value in me working with men who have that experience, because if we're just at that, at the basketball game and we hit the free throw line for our entire childhood and our parents are never in the audience, and when we go home and we say we made 30 points in that game, and they go, no problem, just do your homework or do your chores, that in itself is an ongoing piece of traumatic, that creates a traumatic pattern, right? And so, it doesn't have to be a dramatic big T trauma to have an impact. But what it does have to do is our need is to uncover, why we can't seem to get over these things. And it's very obvious. We look at the things we repeat over and over and go, how come this keeps happening? Like there's men after leader who go, how come this keeps happening? And there's a real clear reason. We can just dig in a little deeper. There's probably good wiring in there that has set that in motion, and now you're set for life. Let's figure out how to, where that's coming from. And men, I don't know. I think men aren't talked about enough. I think men, it's hard to convince anyone that a middle-aged white guy's, problem is a problem. But right now, the entire world is on tenterhooks as we look at wars going on by men who are extraordinarily unhealthy, who've had really bad experience in their life and managed to somehow continue to perpetuate it for the worse. We do great harm to the world if we're not well, but not all men aren't well. Not all men, there's no toxic men, there's toxicity in situations, right? We talked on, there was a very big topic that you revealed this week that you want to talk about publicly. And, troubled men make trouble, and it's not getting off the hook. The worst, not only do troubled men make trouble, but the people around them who know amplify the trouble.
Yep. And the people who stay silent.
The silence
don't help.
And either the silence, which is the unwilling to perpetuate a penalty or a punishment for that behavior, or the lack of ability to understand, because it starts somewhere. So the moment that first red flag comes up and a person around them who could probably help doesn't understand what to do, doesn't have the tools, and won't go in there because they don't want to be involved, the next step happens, and then the next step. And it gets worse and worse and worse. And it's not the responsibility of our community, but boy, it kind of would help if people felt more comfortable saying, there's some things maybe you should, or maybe someone can help you, right? And start it early. Once it's out of the gate, it's not good.
Yeah, especially by those closest to you. You'd think that, they'd be more willing to hear that from them. But yeah, we're all kind of just in our own little bubbles, and there's not.
Everyone's afraid. Everyone's afraid.
Yeah.
In their own way. It's hard. Life seems harder than it ever has been in the last decade or last 5 or 6 years. People are afraid to risk that. People are afraid that somehow it will be worse if they somehow create waves or rock the boat or point a finger. Yet in the big picture, social media, everyone's pointing a finger. But then they won't point it internally or next door or, in the same house. And I think that we have to begin to develop the tools and the understanding personally of what that means, and then combine that with a community, a sense of back to community to connect. Now I'm working in business that we do peer support. Peer support in the 80s was my neighbor down the block who yelled at me for doing something wrong, but took me in, rubbed some dirt on my knee, and then fed me a popsicle. That was community, and that was peer support back then.
Yeah.
And the key is, back then they didn't know what was helpful. They just had good intention.
Yeah.
Now people, if they knew what's helpful, we have to now help them connect and bring that good intention back to the community. And it's missing so much in our lives. I'm part of a movement to try to pull that back together.
That's awesome. And yeah, like I said in my video, the work starts within each of us, and that's how we change the world out there. It starts in here, the woman in the mirror, the man in the mirror. And that's how we change the world. So it's the work for all of us to do. Yeah, we can point fingers, but what are we doing personally to work on ourselves?
And digging into all of this over time, okay, well, this happened to me, and what made it worse in my life was I knew a reoffender. I didn't know him personally, but I knew him personally because he was abused by the same guy. And then he went out to have a very high profile Calgary-based reoffense. And he went to jail for it. And he was offended on other young boys. And so for me, I saw that happening. And unfortunately, I think it affected someone near me. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm guilty that I didn't say anything. Right. So I carried that for years and years and years as well as a couple of suicides that were in the mix in there. And the problem is, so I looked at some of the stats. I'm like, well, what about the reoffending rates? Like, what happens? And some of the stats are, the numbers are a little higher, I think, than what is statistically valid. But the studies are not really great out there. But 1 in 3 may reoffend, who've been abused, may reoffend. But that number in some of the valid studies is actually lower. It's like 20%. But when you look at abusers, those numbers then can really skyrocket. It goes up to 1/3 to 3/4 of anyone who is an abuser was abused. Yeah. And so there's this perpetuation in some contexts. And then, Angela, and as humans, we have a large variety of humans, and some are just plain deviants. Deviant with terrible, they're never going to be the right person. Right. And it's just a statistically valid piece. And if a small percentage, 0.001% or something of the population is deviant and dangerous and awful, collectively on 8 billion people, that's a ton. In our communities, it's not that much. And so it exists. It's real. It was always the concern I had. I remember there was a Van Halen video when Sammy Hagar started, and it was right now, that song Right Now.
Right. Yeah.
And on the video, there was like stats. Right now, someone is
brought. That's right.
Right now, there's a killer walking in your neighborhood. And that made me investigate that statistic back then. And statistics are like 0.1% of the community, but that on 1 out of 1,000 people who could potentially be a murderer.
Yeah.
Not but could be. When you look at the stats, you go, that's scary. So but it's not everybody, and everybody's good, more than not, right? And most people have good intentions, and most people, if they're not well, would like to be well, and most people would like to help those who aren't well be well. And so if we begin to work in a culture and build cultures in community and corporate settings where we spend our time, a culture of wellness and a culture of accommodation in terms of, you may not be doing well, but it's not just to not be okay. It's, here's some tools. We understand that you might need help. Here the tools are. There's no risk. You don't lose your job for having to go through this. You don't have to worry about your pay grade, your status. your position, you're good, right? And then we might get a culture of wellness or support.
Yeah, I think we're getting there. It's definitely an easier conversation, but it needs to, go even broader, I guess. But anyway,
Yeah.
let's talk about.
We already warned people that we were going to go all over the place.
Yeah. That's always the way it is. That's all right. That's all right. So tell me about writing your book. So you dealt with all this. You opened up about your trauma. You're going to therapy and all that good stuff. So what made you decide, hey, I need to write a book about this and start a podcast and a movement on this? And how scary was that?
Well, I had already written 8, or been
right.
part of, right? But they were on philanthropy or business, right?
Yeah.
Like it was all, how does an entrepreneur take another step, and how do we connect it back to things that are important? So, it's not like the theme of giving back hasn't just been wired into my veins a long time ago. But on the book, I needed to get something out there that demonstrated this, because I felt that I was able to go through a journey of healing that happened in 4 months. But let's say I blew out my ACL in my knee, that would be 6 months to a year to repair. So like, I feel like 4 months of really good work, of effort to get well, seems like it pales in comparison to bad injury. So, that's good. So how do I get that part out of it? Like the fact that I buried it for 40 years, that when I was hit by an overstressor moment in life, that it was a very real experience to consider that I shouldn't be here and my insurance policy would be my legacy, right? And then to somehow figure out how to dig in and go, I never want to do that again. I can't do that to the family around me. And maybe there's hope. How do I dig in and find out how I got there? And that for me was the intriguing part, is like, what got me? What was the moment? And for me, it was obvious. I was like, there's an elephant in the room, but I've never dealt with it. So maybe that's it, right? So in that process, though, learning that there's ways to go about getting well, there's therapeutic ways as well as practical ways. And then knowing that the other side of it, because there was a moment when I went through this process, all of a sudden it just felt right. It felt good. And now all the fear was gone. You talked about talking about being that life coach who asks personal questions versus business only. It was the fear. It was the moment I was fearless about anything, and I knew my worth existed, whether I breathed or didn't breathe, I was worthy. Then it was okay to ask anything or talk to anything about anything. And so once I felt that, I wanted to tell people that it's good at the other side, that the risk we perceive for keeping the secret and the value of keeping a secret is the worst thing possible. When it never lives up to the hype, you're better off for it, and you grow better, and you'll be able to do things that you never thought possible afterwards. So I wrote a book that explained that journey and gave it my personal context. And that's it. I don't deep dive into my abuse situation. I just reflect on, these are patterns. This is how I identify them now. And I did this all my life. And I used words to, like, emotional words. Like, emotions are the milestone, like the mile markers on the road. And then the patterns are the things that the emotions describe. So anger would be described, or fear, or, whatever, shame or guilt. And then on the other side, when you start to heal, emotions become transient. Like emotions are really supposed to be transient. You get angry, you get happy. If you're perpetually happy, you're probably got a problem. If you're perpetually angry, you got a problem, right? So how do we move through that? So the idea is that we can experience joy, we can experience love, we can experience happiness, and we can experience this and embrace it fully, because we're worthy of that. And moving to the other side of healing, you understand that that's allowed, and that's important, and that's part of your life. And it's also transient. It's not a pursuit of happiness, it's a pursuit of joy, what you're doing, and purpose. And that in itself will create whatever emotions come, right? There, it's valuable. So I wanted to share that from a men's perspective, and give men a book that they can read and go, yeah, that, I talk about, early encounters that created a potential fight moment in my late teens. Sporting analogies and stories. So, and personal relationships and business as well. So these things all hopefully become relatable to men who go, I remember something like that, and I was always afraid, just like Mike. Now I see that Mike went through it and it didn't hurt him. It only made things better. Maybe I can do that.
Yeah. So what was that moment that I feel like a lot of men, most men, I don't know what I want to say here, but they have like, there's sort of like an ego barrier of like, you need to drop that ego in order to deal with what's actually going on and dig deeper. And like, what made it click for you that, hey, I need to do this work and this is where it's coming from? Like, what was that moment that just sunk in for you?
I think most men know they need to do the work who haven't done the work.
Yeah.
And this almost makes me cry every time. That was 5 years later. The moment my family, in particular my son, but my family, my wife, our daughter, the moment they said, "Don't worry, we've got your back." Right? It meant the bills we'll figure out the bills. We'll figure out everything else. If you're not well, we're not well. So heal, invest the time, the energy, the dedication to healing, and we've got you. No matter what comes out, no matter the information, the secrets that you feel you're afraid to talk about, we got you. And so once you've removed the risks, I mean, when you're on your knees, risks don't feel very risky. You're like, what could possibly go wrong? It could all be over tomorrow and the pain could be done. That'd be great, But along the way, what we need to know as men in particular, after we realize that there may not be risk for it, that we do need help, and we could use a lift up, not a pull down, that when we know that someone genuinely has our back, doesn't have to be family, it could be whoever, someone. If we know whoever it is that may be part of our life in our network of some sort has our back unconditionally and full support without judgment. It's interesting. The hockey, there's a lot of negatives that came out of that US hockey thing. And hockey rooms in general haven't always been the most positive, but in a lot of ways they are positive. And they allow men to be men in a way that men can't be and get that shit out there in a locker room environment. But what works in that environment is that it stays in the room. And they know when they're out on the ice, if we're in the ice, that their teammates have their back. So if they want to take a risk, and the risk might be, a dazzle, might be a play, it might be a fight, it might be whatever. If they want to risk being open and vulnerable in the most dramatic way possible, someone on that bench will jump off that bench and have their back.
Yeah.
If we know that in life, men are able to move forward. If we feel that doesn't exist, and that includes our wives, our partners, our relationships, our family, if we don't feel that those people have our back, we're not doing it. Not even taking the step. We know we need help. There's a call away. Our EAP will pay for it at work. Screw that. I'm going to do this alone. I'm not going to do this.
Is that because men feel like there's such a pressure on them to hold it all together, like you say, provide and protect? And
what if it doesn't? Men have to, in that case, just in this wiring of protect and provide, failure is not only not an option, but creates terrible consequences. And often it's more perceived. Like, let's be honest, like it's more perceived than real, but nevertheless. And so if I fail at this and they don't have my back, I'm going to lose everything. I'm going to lose everything. I'm going to lose my family. I'm going to lose my money. I'm going to lose my house, like everything. It's gone. So why do I have hope? I'm not going to even bother.
Interesting.
Let's just push forward. Let's bury that, seal it up, and move on.
I can see that. It's like you're going to make it a lot worse if you do this, because the what ifs are.
Why would I want to talk about that? It'll only make matters worse.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It might, if no one's got your back, it might not. It's not going to get better. So, but most people somewhere in your life will have your back, and you're just afraid to ask.
Yeah, That's awesome. Love it. Okay, so let's talk about some of the tips that you wanted to talk about. So you mentioned emotional awareness for leaders can be their superpower.
Yeah.
But like we talked about through this whole conversation, most entrepreneurs are really wired to just push through, optimize, move fast. How do you make the case for doing that inner work to someone who just sees it as a soft side or beside the point, especially when they're focused on revenue and growth and like the business metrics that you were talking about in your former business, right?
Every business leader, right, is looking for ways to optimize, maximize, scale, grow, do better, right? And they'll use any tool possible to do that. Viewing the uncovering of the thing that limits us in certain situations all the time, over and over, our repeated patterns that don't help us, viewing that as an opportunity to get rid of those on the way up is the best way to do it. And the reality is that's exactly what happens. It's like there's this constant, I'm writing a 10th book. I talk about,
oh my God.
Let's say I talk about gravity. I'll just talk about it like gravity. There's a gravity to carrying the secret, carrying the burden, carrying that limitation, and always bumping into it, right? And it's not like you can't fly, it's that you're being held down. And being held down creates a frustration. And so for leaders who have that sense in some part of their life, and it's maybe personal, not professional, like professional might be the place where they have the best results. Personally, they might be screwing everything up. Wherever that is, there's an opportunity to not screw that up anymore or not be limited anymore. And so viewing this as an opportunity versus a challenge or a chore, right, or a hard task. I mean, nothing worth having isn't a bit difficult. We have to struggle through things to enjoy them and to really rise. And so if a leader is actually worth their merit, they'll dig into the hard stuff so that they don't have limitations going forward. You'll do the hard conversations with an executive employee that may help your business, but they're not in the right track, and you'll give them all kinds of guidance and you help them out and you'll give them tools, you'll give them the software and technology they need, and yet you won't do it to yourself. That's ridiculous. So if you're really a leader who wants to grow, what kind of insanity would it be to not deal with that stuff?
Yeah, it's an opportunity for optimization, just like anything else. So
no question.
Yeah.
And boy, it's so painless. It's only
you
better.
Make it painless. You make it painless.
I don't know. Like it's only better. It's like, I don't know how better to say it. It only gets better. Like it doesn't get worse because you went through that. It's just a period of work, whatever that looks like for people.
Well, now you can speak to that too, because you're on the other side of it. So it helps.
Yeah. And then I interviewed, in the book writing, I interviewed dozens and dozens of men who did the whole journey.
Oh, cool.
And I'm like, you guys are amazing. And you're never part of my life before. And now you're all part of my life. Like how'd that happen? And I was like, how did all the people I didn't want in my life were in my life before? Now they're not. And now these great people, I'm like, what's going on here? And so it's just, it's a revelatory experience. It really is. I often talk about some things that really require, like, people talk about balance, work-life balance, and I won't be balanced. I got to balance my life. Balance is also difficult. And I look to stability. And, we talk about it. Like I'm building I've got a retreat built. We pushed it to the fall. We can't push it in closer to the summer. There's World Cup going on. It's impossible to get places that you want to go. Anyways, push fall, and it really focuses on the things we need in order to be purposefully off balance. In other words, tackle things that are hard, get uncomfortable, and grow. We need key elements of our life that are stable, and if emotional awareness piece as well. If our physical health, our emotional or psychological health, our financial health, our social health, and then for some people it's spiritual, religious, I call it purpose. If those 5 pieces are stable, are strong, are robust, then we have the ability to tackle anything. And we never, ever truly feel off balance because we embrace that opportunity. So get your physical health together, get your mental health together, get your financial house in order, create social health by not being isolated, by engaging people, creating friendships, nurturing friendships, and build purpose understand what that means for you to wake up every day and contribute in whatever way it is for you in the world, you get that stuff together, then everything can go off kilter because you can always handle it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
so
that's
we build that out in the retreat, is we work on those pieces in a very 1 foot in reality and 1 foot in an incredibly beautiful natural environment.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, we'll link that in the show notes when you have the website up for that. We'll definitely put that in so people can find out more about it.
Cool.
Yeah, and I know let's let people know. I got a little graphic here I'm going to put up. Your book here is called Unlimited Worth.
Oh,
yeah, you can get a copy on Amazon. Is that correct?
You bet. You can go to my website, unlimitedworth.org. And if you order it there, I'll sign a copy and send it to you.
Oh, wow. There you go. So on the
Unless it's overseas, then go to Amazon. You'll get it better.
Okay. There you go. You got a couple options, people. And also, where can people find you online?
Probably the best place is LinkedIn. That's
Okay.
my realm of consistent publication of information. So you can find Mike Skrypnek at LinkedIn.
Okay.
Grow, Get, Give is my LinkedIn handle. You can find me also on Instagram under my name, or Unlimited Worth, the Unlimited Worth Project. Those are the two places that you'll find me mostly on social media.
Excellent. And I will link all those as well. But thank you for being on the show. This was a very enlightening conversation, always a good one, and a very important one, I think, for men to hear.
I hope that in some way that the messages land, that enlighten, a lot of women who hear this conversation, even though it's directed to support men, are desperate to learn how to support men.
Exactly.
At work or at home. And when they understand some of the nuances and the perspective that a man brings to the table about their concerns, it may help open that conversation of support.
Absolutely. I think it's helped me understand how men think and how I can be supportive for them in a way that helps them,
Yeah. And they want it. Men want to be helped. They just don't understand how to go about it.
Yeah. Or how to ask, or Exactly. Exactly. Well, thank you, Mike, for being here.
It's my pleasure. It's always great to hang with you, Angela.
Yeah, you too. You too. And thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.